to me just this past summer, and their energy and just their commitment to really this part of politics that we never think about, but is so critical and so important, as you're going to hear. So I want to thank them. And I do also want to thank my team, Chanel Stewart and Alex Smith. Alex has really been, just the anchor, kind of pulling this all together for us. Our center, the Center for Leadership by Women of Color, was actually founded during the pandemic, which is probably why you may not have heard about it. We were founded in March of 2020, and really our mission is to study what women of color bring to the table that really transforms what we mean by leadership. And so we are thrilled to partner with Ready for Launch. And we're gonna dive into some questions here, but I am thrilled the women that you are going to hear from today, we had a meeting last week and I felt like it was the panel before the panel, just the wisdom that was being shared and people trading ideas and bouncing off of each other. And so we're gonna duplicate that today, and probably do it even better than we did last week, but it was just such a fulfilling experience, even just getting in the Zoom room with these women. So I'm gonna introduce them briefly and then launch into the questions. And then panelists, if you have additional details that you'd like to share, I'm sure, the audience would be willing, I certainly would be willing to hear them. So we have 4 amazing women of color panelists for today. The first person I'm going to introduce is Frederica McGee. Frederica McGee is the Chief of Staff to Supervisor Holly Mitchell, who serves on the Board of Supervisors for Los Angeles County. The second person I'm going to introduce is Jennifer Barraza. Jennifer Barraza is the Chief of Staff for Council Member Kevin De Leon on the Los Angeles City Council. Then we have Mary Hodge, and Mary Hodge is Deputy Mayor to Los Angeles Mayor Eric Garcetti. And then we also have Jessica Caloza. I hope I'm saying it right, and if I'm not, please correct me. And she is a commissioner on the Board of Public Works here in LA. And so again, these are 4 very powerful, 4 very accomplished women that you're about to hear from. And so what we're going to do is we're going to talk through probably for another 25 or so minutes, just asking questions back and forth. They will sometimes answer, they sometimes won't. We talked a little bit about sometimes people had really good stories or ideas that they wanted to share. So sometimes I'll direct questions. But again, if you want to hear more, once we're done with some of our questions, we have a Q&A section on the Zoom, and you can submit your own questions there. And so we'll make sure that there's plenty of time for that towards the end of this hour. So the first question is really pretty straightforward. And I'm actually going to start with Jessica on this question. But I do want everybody, just so they can introduce themselves, to answer this one. What was your first job in politics? And how did you confirm that this was really the career that you wanted?
Thank you so much, Professor Alfaro, and you pronounced my name perfectly. So thank you for that. And just excited to be here with so many powerful, influential, and just inspiring women. We don't get to all be in the same Zoom room at the same time, actually talking about us and our development and how to encourage more women of color to really enter government and politics, because it's a really exciting time in Los Angeles, I think. So thank you for hosting and moderating. Of course, thank you to Eric and Charlotte at Ready to Launch for providing this opportunity. But I started my first job in politics, and I'll take it back a few steps before I dive into that. Really started off with me getting really sick. I was in college taking on one too many jobs, taking on one too many classes, trying to make the most of this opportunity. I was the first person in my family to actually graduate from college, but I was a senior at UC San Diego, and I just ended up burning myself out. I think a lot of us know what that feeling feels like. And then I ended up getting really sick to the point of being hospitalized with pneumonia. I ended up in the hospital on my birthday out of all days. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm gonna die here on my birthday. This is horrible. I didn't even graduate from college. And it turns out that I ended up having to be hospitalized for several weeks. And I recovered health-wise, but ended up with several $100,000 of medical debt, or I would have. And the reason why I wanted to enter politics and government was really my saving grace during this time was actually the Affordable Care Act that President Obama fought for. And there was a really contentious provision that a lot of us might take for granted now, but during the time was really contentious, which was keeping students like I was in college on their parents' healthcare plan. And so for me, this experience of being hospitalized, of making sure I actually had healthcare coverage really taught me the value and importance of public policy, the impact of these programs to really literally save the lives of people like myself that otherwise would not be where I am today if I would have to worry about medical debt. And so I owe that debt of gratitude to President Obama, and did everything I could to really help him in his effort, whatever that meant. And so I started off being an intern in his administration, and then applying to serve on his campaign in Virginia, and then eventually served in his administration. But for me, I just wanted to get my foot in the door mentality, as I like to say it, because I just wanted to help in any way I can and to contribute to the mission. And so that was kind of my entering into politics story, and my really the value and the importance of something like the Affordable Care Act to me personally. And so.
Wow, that's incredible. And so when we heard that you had a great story, no one knew it was going to be that amazing. So thank you very much for that, Jessica. And so Frederica, I want to turn to you. Would love to hear about your first job in politics, but also just want to hear just more on a basic information kinds of question. Not everybody understands how an elected official's agenda actually develops. So a little bit of both.
Absolutely, absolutely. So my first job was actually an unpaid job in politics. My grandfather was a state elected official in the state of Missouri and had come from the building trade. So my first job was folding flyers when back in the day, we didn't do online and social media because this was back in the early 70s. And I would be in the Union Hall folding flyers and getting stuff ready for precinct walking. So that was my first job, my unpaid job as a, I think I was like about 5th or 6th grade. And then my first paid job, I worked for Congressman Glenn Anderson, a congressional member out of the Long Beach area. And one of my biggest accomplishments is this was when AIDS was just on the forefront. And if you did not have full-blown AIDS, you weren't eligible for SSI. And so if you were simply HIV positive, you could not get coverage. And so I had a constituent who was housing insecure. And so that, of course, would prompt problems. And so I pushed and pushed and pushed and was finally able to get him coverage. And my congressman was like, you have a gift, you need to go to law school. And that kind of encouraged me to go on this public policy trail. And so in that effort, I talked about just that experience about what's going on. Elected officials, you know, sometimes people believe that they spend their whole lives in politics, but many of them come to the table with a whole life experience. For instance, my supervisor has been in the health and human services space for a great amount of her career. She worked for an elected official, but she also was a CEO of a nonprofit, Crystal Stairs here. And so many times you see a policy agenda of an elected official. A lot of it has to do with the work that they may have done, but there is this beautiful organic piece of it as well, where many elected officials are very gracious and very giving to allow for staff to be a part of that collaborative process. And so staff, of course, will have relationships with some outside advocates that will help to do some of these things. And then, of course, there's also the issues that are really front and center in their particular district, which may be campaign promises or different issues that are going on in the district. And those also become organically a part of that elected officials legislative agenda. I hope that covers both things for you.
It does, absolutely. And all of us, I mean, who hasn't had a grandpa or a grandma or an auntie or a tia, like, okay, you're coming with me, right? Like this is, you just kind of get into some of the family activities. So Jennifer, I'm gonna come to you. Would love to hear about your first job in politics, but also, Frederica was talking about how an agenda develops, but I'm gonna ask you and Mary, just to talk about how do you play a role as chief of staff in supporting the agenda once it's set?
Yep. Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be on this panel with all these awesome women that I look up to. So my first job in politics was as an intern at SEIU while I was in college for the janitors union. And I came in the middle of a contract fight with the aerospace companies. So as you can imagine, that was like the most exciting thing I'd ever done because we were on picket lines and it was super exciting. So I had to like go back to school, finish my last year. And once I graduated, I like ran back to the union. And so I got like my first job, my first real paid job was as a union organizer. And I think for anyone if there's anyone here that's a union organizer or has done that work, the moment you have your first worker conversation where they sign a card, you're hooked and you're there like forever. So I was there for a really long time. And I've been working in labor and politics and government ever since. But that's kind of where I got my start. So it's a little different, it was a little bit more grassroots and organizer, but it kind of got us to the same situation. So I think a little bit of what Frederica said, right? Elected officials kind of run on a platform that's usually based on their own personal values and passions, and then the needs of the community, kind of molding those things together. And for most, I hope, that then translates into an agenda when they're in office. And, sometimes the goals and agendas are really big and bold. My boss, for example, likes to have these big, bold agendas, right? So he's the 100% clean energy guy. And right now it's, 25,000 units of homeless housing by 2025 that we've got to figure out how to like operationalize. But I think my biggest responsibility is to ensure it's kind of twofold. The first is to ensure that our team is all on the same page, that they all understand the council members' agenda, that they're all given the tools to accomplish it, and that they all understand that it's okay to retool along the way if we hit any snags. And I think the most important thing is that this is real-time work. You're constantly reassessing, and that's kind of what I learned when I was an organizer, right? You're constantly reassessing to see what's working and providing feedback to the member. And so, as a chief, you're both the right hand of the person helping to think through strategy, but then you're also helping your team execute, right? And how do we kind of make that happen? And so kind of as a chief, you kind of sit in the center role where you're seeing everything happen and kind of like have your hands in everything, but also at the same time allowing people to grow and develop. So.
That's a really good point, right? That you're kind of at the center of the spokes of the wheel and have to kind of, figure out how all those spokes are moving in the same direction, right? Even if it means one has to reconfigure. So Mary, I do want to turn to you. Would love to hear your story of how you got into politics, but also just from, a more executive level kind of perspective, what's your role in terms of supporting the mayor's agenda and how that looks, right? Because Jennifer talked about staff, and how the staff is all on the same page, but you also have a bunch of departments that you engage with. So would love to hear how you handle that piece.
Sure. Good morning, everybody. Super excited to be on this call because I got my start in politics from a program just like Ready to Launch called Campaign Corps that Emily's List in DC does, which is they take college students straight out of college and your first job is a campaign with the hope that you get hooked on it so much that you become a campaign manager and keep doing it over and over and over again. So I got hooked, obviously, and spent 10, 15 years running different campaigns all over the country. In California, actually, one of my first races was Holly Mitchell when she ran for assembly, and I was one of her first staffers trying to help figure out what we're going to do and where we're going to go. I love her for that from this day. She's amazing. So yeah, I got my start really early on with a really great group that just helped stay in connect with everybody, encouraged you, actually told you this was a job that you could have, that you can get paid to do this. This is a career. I think a lot of women, and also just women of color, just people in color in general, don't necessarily get messaged to that this is a job that you can have. You watch shows like The West Wing, not everybody on there, except for one person, is person of color. Like you watch when you used to see campaigns and when there's documentaries about them, there's not a lot of staff that are of color and hardly any women, especially in the campaign manager role. So I think it's really important for us to have these conversations, have these panels, so people can see that this is a pathway and this is something that you can do and you can do as your lifelong career, not just one time. You can do it as a volunteer, you can do it as a staff for one campaign, but you can also do it over and over and over again because you get hooked, because you like all of the change, you like working with all the different candidates. It's a different thing every time. It's exciting, it's a lot of fun. It's The West Wing plus a whole bunch of other new shows, you know, all mixed into one. So as you mentioned, yeah, I oversee just recently 15 different departments as the Deputy Mayor of City Services. And just like Jennifer said, you're kind of in this middle section of making sure that everybody knows what the agenda is, but then helping them, making sure they're executing it, and then bringing back feedback about what's working and what's not working, so you can constantly be changing it and retooling. With the 15 departments, we have different GMs. They all are very different, from everything from the zoo all the way to infrastructure, to the river, to transportation. And my role, since our mayor has set, you know, his agenda is back to basics, it's been from both terms. So is what is back to basics in each of those departments? How do we streamline things? How do we make sure stuff is getting through? But how do we also become more creative in back to basics, and what new programs can come out of that, that kind of sticks to that messaging and the agenda? So it's not an easy thing, but it's a fun thing. And it's really cool to kind of be in the middle and touch all pieces, and just kind of help everybody get to what we want to see accomplished.
Excellent. So 15 departments, boy, you must have your hands full. Thanks for taking the time. I know everybody is busy on this call, don't get me wrong, but when you said 15 departments, that just kind of hit kind of hard there. So I did want to ask a question, and Frederica, I'm going to come to you with this question. Mary just mentioned that she had initially worked on a campaign for Holly Mitchell early on. Now she works for the mayor. I know you've worked for several different elected officials. And so I wanted to ask a question just partially about leadership style, but partially about how a chief of staff or a legislative director, I'll spell out the entire word for those folks who may not know what a leg director is. How do you think about managing or navigating how different elected officials handle different issues? And I know you had an experience that was really, really helpful in helping us think about, not just navigating different personalities, but different leadership styles even.
Mm-hmm. When we talked about is what many might perceive to be a conflict or things like that about how a different elected official may address it. And when we had our little pre-panel last week, part of the conversation was, I worked for 5 different speakers while I was in the state legislature. And one of those elected officials, it came up about staff raises. And anytime public officials or, that they are giving staff raises, there's this idea immediately that sometimes, a state or county workers or city workers are not worthy of that raise. And so we had write-ups in the Sacramento Bee. One of those elected officials took it head on and said, I think that it is important that government have qualified staff, and I understand and able to keep my ability to keep those staff on board means that I need to pay them. And if I want my team to know more than the lobbyist walking in, trying to persuade me or con me of something, I need to make sure they're there. There was another speaker that I worked for took a different route. They instead retracted those raises after they came out. We found that subjected our team to more scrutiny, and it was more, like you said, about like, how do you manage that conflict and damage control? And so, but considering those different situations, they both were speakers at the different times. So you talk about the temperature of the public, as well as other things that were going on in the state budget at that time. And so I think a lot of times we can become judgmental about whether an elected official might have made the right or wrong call because it was different from a prior elected official. But I don't think that it is fair to look at it in an isolated situation, because all of those factors are very different at each given period of time. And that as a chief of staff, it's your job, or general counsel, or whatever capacity you're serving in, is to give the best advice for that moment. What are the outside factors going on? What are we doing internally? And what are the dynamics, quite frankly, with that elected official in the press? Because that also can help to generate more animosity as well. And so those having that blunt conversation with your elected official in a safe space, you don't do it out in public, allows them to make the best decision for themselves at the time.
Yeah, that's a really helpful way to put it in terms of, the role of the media. And certainly, the role of the media is a really important thing for our democracy, right? Having that light that's shed on what people are doing is a really important piece of it. But I also wanted to ask just about, your own leadership styles. And as we think about, how we engage with our elected official. And so Mary and Jessica, I wanted to ask about this a little bit, just in terms of your own leadership role in shaping your elected officials' effectiveness, right? So, doesn't have to be a specific conversation that you've had, with the mayor, Mary, for example, but, just thinking through, and Jessica, when you were serving in the Obama administration, how do you manage your own leadership style, which may be not the same as the leadership style of the elected official you're engaging with, and just how does that work?
Sure, I can start. It's a really good question. And for me, I probably think about it less in terms of what their personality style is, and more so in the framework of me thinking about what is my role, being a woman of color, as an Asian American woman at the table. When we talk about that, what does it mean to have a seat at the table? Like, everyone here has it. And we may be at a seat in the back of the room, on the side of the room as an intern, or what have you, but the point is we are in the room where decisions are made, and whether we vocalize our opinion before the meeting or after or during, it's really important to exercise that. And I think of it as like a muscle, right? And for me, if I represent a certain community that's not in the room, like the Asian American community, it's really up to me to make sure that these issues are brought to the forefront, because I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't flag, hey, this is important for the Filipino community or the Asian community or the Vietnamese community. That is part of our job and our role, to make sure that the people who appointed us and that we represent, that they're successful, that they understand the communities that we represent, and that we have our pulse on what these community issues are. So an example of one this past year that's come up, of course, is the rise in anti-Asian hate crimes. And so that's one that I continually flag for our city team. And, that's one where everyone in the city family has been incredibly responsive. But, those are issues that me hearing directly from the Chinese American community and people in Chinatown, that they're being harassed outside of their own home, or they feel afraid to go get a vaccine. Those are things that I need to relay properly to the rest of our team so that we can understand and know how to respond. Then, of course, our elected leaders and the mayor can denounce what's happening. And so we have to make sure that we're always representing. And so, we are at the seats of table. We do have a seat at the table, and so that's our responsibility. And so kind of retooling how the question is asked, but it's more of the responsibility that I feel in this position, and how do we make sure that we're doing our job by not just representing the city, but also representing the community in these positions. So it's kind of how I balance this role and the question that you asked.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mary?
I'll just piggyback onto Jessica to say the other thing whether you're a deputy chief of staff or deputy mayor or anybody in a leadership role, is to not only have the people in the room, but figure out how to add more people into the room. So as Jessica's saying, she's in the room and she's speaking up for communities that maybe no one is saying anything for. When you're the chief of staff or at leadership positions, also trying to figure out who is not in this room. How do we get them in this room? Maybe it's not a paid position that we have availability for, but how do we bring more voices in, whether they're directly from the community, from a nonprofit, whether they're constituents, whether you're saying, you know what, we had this conversation in this room right now, but I need to continue to do more research and reach out to a few more people from groups that are maybe not in this room right now. And that's part of your responsibility as being a chief of staff, being a deputy mayor, being anybody in leadership, is that if no one is in the room, getting more people in the room, getting more opinions so that you're not missing something, you're not forgetting something.
Yeah, that part about like making sure that you've really gone the extra mile to make sure you have everything together is another piece of that unspoken work that we don't often think about, right? It's not just the glamorous, oh, here I am signing this Affordable Care Act into law. It's making sure all of the, things, I's were dotted and T's were crossed before that law ever came across, right? Or in the implementation of it afterwards. So thank you for that, Mary. So Jennifer, I'm going to come to you on this one because we talked about this. And, again, I'm just a political science geek who observes all of your bosses on a routine basis. But one of the things I've always noticed about KDL, as you've called him, I've never called him that, but Councilmember DeLeon, is that he is not afraid to surround himself with strong women. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit about, how you personally have experienced other female staffers, whether it's with him or other parts of your career, influencing the way some of these decisions are made.
Yeah, no. So, ever since I came to work for Team KDL or Councilmember DeLeon or however we're going to call it, he's always been staffed by strong, like powerful women. I mean, one of the things that I remember when I came on and he had just become Senate president was that like his legislative agenda and his policy team were all run by like strong, powerful women of color. And so that was, I think, something that like stood out for me. And then where I came to work on the Senate Democrats campaign side, a woman of color was also running that, right? And her task was to get our state a supermajority so that we can continue to implement, the agenda that the legislature, that the Senate had to stand up for working class people, for women, for just all Californians. So I think seeing that be such a commonplace within his teams has made it, for me now having the role that I have, like it's never been a question like, do we hire, a bunch of qualified women to run all kinds of things, because this is he responds well to them or to us, right? He works closely with us. And and I think even before I came to work for him, and I was working at SEIU, I remember kind of working with him because he was carrying one of our big landmark bills around childcare, which is not typically, a quote unquote a man's issue, right? But it's something that I think was clearly delineated by the folks that were working for him and working with him, kind of lifting up things that are important, that make our state run. And so anyway, I think I've been able to see so much of what has been impressive. And when I take a step back is, damn, there were so many powerful women running, policy for the 5th largest economy in the world. And I think that's something that you kind of carry with you forever. And kind of it's helped to shape kind of the way that I see what is possible, right? For women, for women of color, and then come out on the other side to see the execution of these policies become law, and now kind of, be the thing that we all have to, the laws that we all abide by, and how they kind of started and who they came, from the brains of who they came out of, right? So.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And Mary, I know that this was also gender equity, was one of the signature things that Mayor Garcetti also, wanted to make sure he carried out. And he carried it out in a very interesting way. Of course, executive versus, legislative, different kind of agenda in terms of how things get done. But, he carried that out across the 45 departments. And so do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was really important to him that it wasn't just a lip service that he's talking about gender equity, but he wanted to institutionalize it in the city, that each department had a mandate for something that they had. This is something they had to work on. So we have an executive directive that was on gender equity, not only in our own staff, but also across all the departments. All of our departments have a gender equity liaison that they meet monthly, and they come up with what their yearly goals are going to be. And then they have a meeting to talk about, like, are we reaching them? Are we not reaching them? And then we have an annual event, the women's conference, where the whole goal of the women's conference is to drive the departments to accomplish their goals so that we can celebrate them at this event. So it was all about not only telling them this is something important to him, but constantly showing them that it was, and him asking them, we do general manager reviews, and in those general manager reviews, gender equity is a part of the general manager review. They have to show what their goals were, what they accomplished with it, and what the next goals are for the next year. And that's very important that it's brought front and center as a part of how we're reviewing general managers in their daily and yearly work.
Yes, I've actually been to a couple of those. They have also annual kind of commemorations is the wrong word, but they have these kind of, here's what's been done, right? And also lifting up like what departments are doing really well is also really helpful for, again, 45 departments, you want to learn from each other to say, hey, that could possibly work over here, right?
Exactly.
And so it is really helpful.
And I just want to add one thing to that, is also thinking creatively for these departments. What gender equity sometimes isn't not necessarily just hiring more women or making sure, that women with the pay gap. It's also about thinking, like, for example, street lighting. Like, how can a street light creatively help with gender issues with women? And that's, when we do all our new street lights in LA, we should make sure that they have a call button on them. So if something happens, that a woman can go up to it and have an emergency system. How can we create more lighting? How can they have more pieces to it that are going to help, not just with hiring more women, but also in women's issues? So stuff like that has been super helpful. It's a piece of it. And the feedback loop that you were talking about, having these monthly meetings so they can all learn from each other, and what does gender equity and all of the stuff that comes along with it mean, is extremely important.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. So I'm going to ask one more question before we turn to the audience. And Frederica and Jessica, I'm going to come to you for this. This is, we're going to go back to what we were talking about at the very beginning, just in terms of when you first started working in politics. And so Frederica, what barriers did you encounter when you first started working in politics and government? And Jessica, same for you, as kind of first gen, just getting started all the way in DC. What kinds of barriers did you experience, and how did you overcome them?
I'll start with that one. I think Mary hit it on the head. It's not just also about hiring, but also being promoted up in those positions. And I think one of, the elephant in the room is that many times still in our cultural and our society, women are responsible for childcare and, kind of doing two jobs. You do your professional job, and then you come home and you do your mom job and your spouse job, whatever they may be. And so while we talk about supportive elected officials and things like that, there are system dynamics that say, if you have to pick up your child from childcare at 6 or 7 p.m. and there's a meeting going on right there, you end up missing out on that meeting. And you can come back to work and you can do some of those other dynamics, but it is really just a structural piece within our society that we have to struggle with. Now, it's not to say that those things are insurmountable, but it is a reality in which most women find themselves, especially if they are mothers, particularly. And so having available childcare is crucial for us, not only to be in the positions, but also to be promoted and to move up in those positions and have those supportive elected officials. That I remember when I was general counsel to Fabian Nunez, our daycare closed at 7 p.m. And before we ever had a meeting, I told him, like, look, if it's 10 to 7, I'm walking out. I'm not going to make a big deal out of it, but you'll see me leave. And there were a few of those instances where he and I'd look each other, nod, and I'd walk out the meeting and everything like that. And there weren't negative ramifications, but the reality of it is, I was one of the highest paid females in the Capitol, but I wasn't the highest paid person. And so some of those dynamics that allow you to walk out the room still have some ramifications for it. And it's where we see the gender pay gap and things like that. And it does manifest itself in different ways as well. Dealing with some of those things, I think that you have to be honest and candid with your elected official, and push and demand. I think that some of the studies say that women don't ask for promotions 2 years before they really were already qualified and ready to do it. We wait and we wait and wait. And men 9 times out of 10 are not qualified to do it and say, I'm gonna take on that responsibility, right? And get a woman to help them figure it out, quite frankly, right? So I think in those realities, we have to get ourselves out of our own way, right? And push, and not to say that there won't be some ripple effect for you making the ask, but you certainly won't get the raise if you don't ask for it always. And so you've got to empower yourself to figure out how to do that and make the request. And you know what, one of the old fundraising rule is when you're asking someone for money in fundraising, you say, okay, you're going to give me 5,000 or 10,000, and you shut your mouth and you smile and you wait for them to answer. And so don't cross yourself out of the $10,000 that could have been a contribution by getting nervous with silence. We keep moving.
That's a really good point. I would love, well, we can go into the whole fundraising because that is an important piece, unfortunately, that we have to deal with in politics more than maybe we like. But Jessica, would love to hear from you, and then we're going to go to audience questions.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I love what Frederica talked about on the retention piece, right? Once we have women in the door, what is it going to take to keep them? Which you can spend a whole nother hour talking about all those policies and really a lot of the stereotypes that we still need to break down in the workplace. But for me, I think one of the biggest obstacles that I had when I first started in government and politics was really not having the access and not having any contacts, right? So I mentioned I'm a first generation immigrant from the Philippines. English is my second language. And so nobody in my family is from government or politics. I'm also the first person to graduate from college in my family. So I had no contacts at all getting into this place. All I knew is that I wanted to support the Obama administration and people and leaders like him who are progressive and protect people who can't be in the room like myself. But how do I get there? And so I really tapped into, I went to UC San Diego, so I tapped into the UC DC program and did a semester in DC where I got to intern in the Obama administration. And I think that programs like Ready to Launch and Emily's List, like Mary mentioned, are so critical because you just need to have that foot in the door mentality. And I feel like I've tried to carry that with me with every position that I've gotten, is that I just needed to get my foot in the door because I have no contacts. I have no advantage here. Nobody in my family thinks this is a real career until now, now that I'm on the board. And once I get an opportunity to prove myself, I know I'm going to walk through every door that I can and take advantage of every opportunity to really prove my value, broaden my network, find a group of women specifically to help me navigate the space, because it can be really scary when you feel like you're starting out with no contacts and there's not a lot of people that look like you. And so that's where I'm really thankful where we are now in LA City politics, is there's so much diversity. There's a lot of women in politics and government that really gives me hope, because even though I may not, even though I'm just meeting Frederica today, I know that if I reached out to Frederica, she would respond to me and vice versa, right? And so having, for me now, paying it forward and having an open door policy for other women who just want career advice or coffee, I know is something that so many of us try to pass on and pay forward because it can be really tough entering, but just, show up and take advantage of the opportunities that do come your way. Because when I give advice now to people who want to enter politics, I feel like the biggest struggle that I see is that they are turning down opportunities, right? So it's not like an opportunity gap, but it's like they're almost scared to succeed and they don't want to take advantage of certain opportunities because it's not exactly what they wanted. right? But you don't know where that's going to lead. This is an entry point, not an end point to your career. And so that's something that I would encourage those who are just entering politics and government to really think about.
Thank you for that. And that's a really nice segue to our first audience question. The audience was asking, do you have any advice about best practices for networking through emails, informal interviews, and/or fellowships? So Jessica just gave you some really good advice about that. But I also want to ask Mary about that, because Mary, you had some really interesting things you were talking about last week when we were just kind of chatting about this panel with regard to you take an internship, you take an opportunity, how do you work that opportunity into wherever you want to go? So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I would say when I moved to California and Los Angeles, and almost every single campaign job I've ever had here has because of somebody I've met on a different campaign or networking or gone to some event and met somebody. None of them are because I went and put my resume out and then it's like some random person called me back about it. They've all been because of networking. So that's, joining every Dem club you can, going, right now we're about to start and embark on an crazy election cycle with elections up and down California, whether they are city council and mayor and congressional and state assembly. And there's just going to be a ton of stuff to get involved in. So whether you try to go work on those races or you just volunteer on those races, I've known a ton of people that we have hired from internships here at City Hall. Being an intern here has been amazing, especially for young women and young women of color, because they do a lot of awesome work. They're seen. And then as soon as we have an opening, we have a whole group of people to be able to pull from. So just trying to find these things that you can do, whether it's full-time or volunteer basis, just meeting a wide range of people really is going to help you overall. You've got this group that Erica and Charlotte have started, which is ready to launch, which I think is amazing, because there really is a gap in the last couple of years of people who really train people and put them on races and get them their start with a lot of support. So that's amazing. There's a merge. There are, like I said, there's postcard groups where people are getting together at people's homes and they're writing postcards to send to other places in the country for different races, or even to Texas about certain topics. And you just meet a bunch of women and a bunch of politically connected folks there. So I would just say, take any opportunity of any invites you get. Depending on what your political affinity is, trying to figure out the different clubs across the city and when they get together, and just get out there and meet a ton of people. And, the more people you meet, the more folks you're more likely to see who have an opportunity and a chance. And you just need to go plug yourself in there.
Yeah, that's a really great point that, again, the 2022 is coming up and we definitely want to, you have to plan for that. That's not something that just happens, right when January 1, 2022 happens. So Jennifer, I wanted to ask you a question. We had talked a little bit about this with relationship to a different question, but just in terms of networking and also how you go back and forth, because one of the things I mentioned last week was, I've loved this since I was a kid. I grew up outside of DC, but I was always like, what happens when my person loses, right? Or when my person is out of office or something, like, what do I do? Do I go work the grocery store? But you've really managed to seamlessly go back and forth. And so I just wanted to hear a little bit about how not just how you got into that, but how that actually works, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, luckily I live in California, which is solidly blue, and I'm a Dem. So, I think there's work all the time. But with the exception of, the exception of my first job, I feel like I haven't really applied for a job cold since then, right? And I think a lot of that has to do with, again, to everything that Mary said, the relationships that you make with people. Most of the jobs that I think you will get come from conversations that you have with folks, right? Interactions. If, you work in a department and you work with someone from another department, or you work at a nonprofit that works with an elected office, or, and I think people are always, especially folks that are in positions of responsibility or power, always looking for good staff, right? Because good staff is like, once you grab them, you kind of like want to keep them forever. And so I think it really is using every opportunity that you have to come into contact with folks, whether you think, oh, I'll never want to work in entertainment, or I'll never want to work in this, right? And just doing the work with them and figuring out, hey, you know, we've had good rapport, we had a good relationship. I'm in a place where I'm looking for a new path. Like, do you want to sit down and chat with me about if you've heard of anything, you have any ideas? But I will say that I think a lot of it has to do with, again, just the networks that you build and the conversations that you have. And the last thing I'll say, just to kind of piggyback off of, I think something that Jessica and Mary said, is what I found is that, especially like, you know, when I started, young woman of color, right? I think a lot of, there's so many times where I was like, I don't know if I should be in, like, in this room. Am I qualified to be in this room? And I realized early on that no one's got everything together, right? Like, everyone's just trying to figure it out. And once I learned that, I was less afraid to ask for help. And the other piece that I learned was that people were so willing to help you, right? Like, everyone was so willing to say, oh, here, let me show you, or, you know, let's grab coffee and I'll tell you about how this gets done. And so I think just there's something in being vulnerable. Sometimes there's something in just like going for it and like asking for the coffee, or asking, you know, hey, I'm looking for a new job. Like, have you heard of anything? But really, it all has to do with relationships. Because I think for most of us, then our next job isn't going to come from like a job posting, right? It's going to come from the networks that we make.
That's a really good point, Jennifer. And Frederica, I want to come to you because you have a really great strategy that you use that prioritizes networking, but also ask you about, there was a question in the Q&A about, what if I'm in my 40s and I'm just getting started, right? So what does it look like even just to get started to do this, you know?
So on the networking piece, one thing I do is on the first of the month, I have a reminder on my calendar and I say, reach out to 4 folks that, you know, is not my day-to-day people that I work with. So I might, you know, Jessica may get a note from me next month and say, hey, want to do a Zoom coffee, or, you know, maybe we can actually do Starbucks you know, somewhere, depending on our schedules. And people like will do more for you if you invested in that relationship beforehand. We all get busy. And so we all know, even though we're willing to help, but if you have a crunch day, the person who stopped by your office and just waved and didn't ask for anything, and then all of a sudden they need your help, even if you're swamped, you will carve out some time for that person because they paid it forward. It wasn't transactional. It wasn't them always coming, looking for some help in that way. And so that piece is important. I think for the person who is older getting into this space, is that there are a couple of things. We talked about some of the other emerge and everything like that, but even I think that if you're willing to go and do some of the California Assembly and the Senate, as well as the executive branch and the judicial branch, have a fellowship program, right? And there's not the great pay or those type of things, but if you are willing to do those type of things, well, doing fellowships allow you to get into public policy space. But Mary was dead on, you know, like if you participate in your volunteer time for doing campaigns, you have a good chance of establishing relationships with somebody that may be in a position to hire. That person is successful. They'll have to, you know, staff up their entire team, where there might be a few people that they already know that they're going to be on board. But if you put yourself out there and you know, utilize some of the infrastructure that we have already, Dem clubs and things like that, you can enter into the space no matter what age.
That's a great point. And I want to open this one up. I'm going to actually ask anybody who wants to talk about this one to talk about this one, because this will be our last question for the main discussion. Someone said, you know, the pandemic has changed so much of how we do our work. You know, how do we, or how can we in politics actually embrace some of those pandemic silver linings that have come up, especially because, you know, as women, the pandemic wasn't always so great for us, you know, in terms of all the double and triple duty we were doing. So how do we keep what was good and maybe infuse it into how we do our work?
I think we recognize that we all are in positions of that exact authority. Many of us are deputy, you know, mayors or chiefs of staff, and we can begin to implement those type of things in our own teams. So we will, you know, the supervisors, SD2 will come back in a modified version. We won't come back full force. You know, we'll take advantage of some Zoom, some working in the district, those type of things. and really, gain the benefit of some of the learnings and understanding that, and not be legalistic. When I was in the legislature, you had to be in the legislature Monday through Friday, that type of thing. And we found that we can get the work done. And I think that if you utilize your own power and not give your power up, by us making some of those changes, you'll start to see it, countywide. The county is looking at those issues right now about how to maintain and keep a healthy telework schedule and everything. And I think we just have to speak up for it so that we do gain some of those benefits and not take the bad and not get some of the good out of this pandemic.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jennifer.
Yeah, no, I mean, I agree with everything Praduca said. I think it's given us an opportunity to learn about each other's families and our routines and our schedules in a way that we, I think, never would have talked about it before, right? Because we get to see inside our homes and our kids come running in. And so that also, I think, humanizes us and humanizes us to our bosses, humanizes us to each other. I think it gives us more grace with one another. And it helps you rethink how do we do work? Because I believe that every single member of my team is working harder probably than they ever did before without having to come into the office every day. And we're seeing results. So how do we shift the work? And I do think that if anything, that is like the biggest silver lining that we have for the workforce in general, right? For any job that can be done from home can be done effectively. And even if it is sometimes government work. And there's some stuff that can't be replaced, right? For a lot of our field workers who have to go into the field to meet with constituents. But for other folks, like it can be done. And I think I'm excited to support my staff in that way. I think a council member is excited to support us in that way and kind of see how we can work into a new workflow going forward, just given this opportunity that we have.
Yeah, Mary or Jessica? Go ahead, Mary.
I would just add that, working from home, then like also killing it when we work from home, like leading by example, like not being the person who's not available and people call you and like you don't answer your emails. Like, we're all here on this phone to be advocates for our teams to work from home, and that we all have realities now that it's amazing that people are more accepting of. And like the fact that, no one would have paid for Zoom a couple of years ago. Like none of our offices have been like, sure, we'll pay for a Zoom subscription. Now it's like, everybody has to have Zoom or Google Meet or whatever. And that's awesome. And I love that. But I also like want to encourage our teams though, like, don't take advantage of this. Like if we're all going to do this, we need to show that working from home and making all these different concessions like works, and that we are leading by example, and that we're valuable, and that we're getting the stuff done, so that we can keep this. Because, when people start not really necessarily showing, then it looks like people want to use that as the excuse to take it back. And I don't think we need to go backwards on this, but I really do want everybody to like keep showing that this is the new way we can do this. Everybody is just as productive at home, but that takes all of us in killing it and doing it from home. That like, this is what we're going to be doing now.
Great point. Great point. Jessica.
Yeah, I agree with all the points everyone mentioned. And I think one of the things that I'll just add is during COVID, we know that women have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19, and that so many women have left the workplace. And we're struggling to get more workers, let alone more women, to re-enter that. And if we want women to succeed in the workplace, it means not having to make a choice about making dinner or like going to a meeting, or making a choice about childcare, or having a career, right? Because that's a false choice. Everyone here wants to do it all. And I think that that's the flexibility that, COVID-19 really showed everyone, right? Is that a new way of working is possible, and that we can define the future of work and the future of our workplace. And that will really help turnover and staff retention, which we know sometimes can be an issue in government and politics, is that turnover rate and that burnout rate. And so I think I'm all for the flexibility that we give not just women, but other people, men and other workers who might also be afraid to ask about these types of flexibility. So I think once we set up women to succeed, I know everyone else will succeed, because we're just providing more access for everybody.
That is true, absolutely. So I'm going to come around and ask each one of you for just 2 words, in terms of like what you would leave the group with in terms of what they could actually do, right? Like what's one thing they can do after this session that would like move them forward to the next thing that they're looking for. So while you're thinking about that, I'm just going to respond briefly to what everybody has just said about virtual work. I think it's also a really good opportunity, and the poli-sci geek in me is like already firing on all cylinders to look at how our constituents and citizens are going to respond, right? So are they participating more in listening to Board of Supervisor or City Council meetings, right? Because they don't have to actually go there. They don't necessarily have to watch it on TV. They can literally watch it on their phone, right? Because of Zoom, they can zoom in and see it, right? Is that going to lead to greater transparency around some of the things that, our elected officials are going to be working on, which can be a good and a bad thing, depending if, the goal is the election or if the goal is real change. And so, I'm just really curious to see how this is going to shift how LA County, how LA City, how, all of us do business as the government with our constituents, because again, they're going to have more and more opportunity to kind of plug in and express their voices, which is the reason why we live in a democracy. But I think it's also going to be interesting to see if that helps expand who that democracy is, right? Because it doesn't have to be the person who has half a day to drive downtown, to sit and wait for public comment, and then to actually, you don't have to do all of that. You can literally zoom in, take a 20-minute break from work at the right time in the meeting, and then give your public comment. I think I'm really interested to see how that turns out. So now that you've had a chance to think and listen to me geek out a little bit, what's one thing, Jessica, in just 2 or 3 words that someone could do after this meeting?
Yeah, I think it's politics and government. When you're starting off, it's not just about who you know, but it's about who knows you. I could know Oprah, but if Oprah doesn't know me, it doesn't matter, right? So just make sure you follow up and you follow through with who you hear from at events like this, because it'll really help your networking.
Love that. Not just who you know, but who knows you. Jennifer.
I would say take the opportunity that someone's giving to you that pushes you out of your comfort zone. I think for me, it's always been kind of some of these things that I'm like, can I do that? Should I do that? And I've gone and done it and said, wow, I learned so much. And now I can, if I want to, I can go do this new thing, right? And so I would just say take opportunities, even though they're not the clear path that you've thought of in your head. Like, if it comes up and you think it might be something you might be interested in, take it.
I love it. Take the uncomfortable opportunity. I love that. Mary.
I was trying to format my different words. So I came up with just ask or just do it. Not be afraid, just go in there and do it. During COVID, there were so many things that none of us knew what the heck was going on. And we just figured it out. And we just either came up with a program or wrote it all out and just pitched it and went and did it, or just did it and then saw what happened. And, that is where people see what you can do by not necessarily waiting to be asked to do something, but just going and doing it yourself and kind of having people be able to see what you're able to get done.
Fantastic. And not with the swoosh, just do it. Frederica, close us out.
So mine's is similar. It's a statement. My team hears me say it all the time. And it's ask for forgiveness, not permission. So it's how you show up in the room, pushing yourself to do that, taking the risk and the confidence that you walk into that, and don't give your power away. So do it. And if it's not exactly how you had planned, that's fine. Ask for the forgiveness, but don't wait for someone to give you permission to do it.
I love it. And I'm going to conclude with one that we didn't get to in our Q&A at the beginning, but was just so valuable. And I think we always need to remember it. Don't badmouth your last boss. So whoever that last boss was, whether they were wonderful or horrible, don't badmouth, because things get very, very small, even cities as big as LA get very, very small, very, very quickly. And so as with any industry, it will get back to that person. And you do not want to also develop that reputation as the person who's going to come and then trash and then, move on to whatever the next opportunity is. So it's a bit of graciousness I would leave you with. But again, I would like to thank Frederica McGee, Mary Hodge, Jennifer Barraza, and Jessica Caloza for an incredible conversation. Thanks also to Erica Liebman and Charlotte White, the co-founders of Ready to Launch, for bringing this idea to us. And thank you again to Alex Smith and Chanel Stewart for all of their help with our Center for Leadership by Women of Color. Join the mailing list if you haven't already. And thank you, everyone, for taking your lunch hour and being with us today.